Since the start of the coronavirus, like global lockdown in early 2020, some aspects of technology advanced more in 3 months than they otherwise would have done in 5 years. The most visible example of this was video calling. I think it quickly became an absolute necessity for business, but also for personally for well-being and socializing. As a user of video calling for 15 years or so, I'd like to give you some of my tips and ideas on making your video calls the best they can be. At least in my opinion anyway. A few of these tips will be common sense because early 2020 saw a multitude of articles on this subject, so users are much more equipped and much more savvy than they've ever been. I must stress that most of these tips are for business users. They do work for everyone, but they might not be as practical or necessary when you're just chatting to friends. And I can't or wouldn't like to guess how much your friends can tolerate or would even notice when it comes to video calling. It's a little bit different though when you're talking about business, when you need a message to come across really clearly. The first one is, of course, connectivity. Excellent connectivity to the internet is absolutely everything, and without that, all these other points are completely moot. Not everybody has a super fast connection to the internet, but that's okay because video calling software has the ability to adapt. It adapts its bitrate and resolution accordingly. It does, however, need to be consistent and reliable. So here are the main ideas. I'm only summarizing here. I'll assume some sort of technical knowledge on your part. Firstly, be clear on where your Wi-Fi points are and choose your location accordingly. Pretty straightforward. That's just a matter of getting as close as you can to your router. If the location or your office can't be changed, then try routing your Wi-Fi through a mains. You can do that with a number of different sort of devices that are available, and you can have then a dedicated Wi-Fi access point in the office, so you can ensure you always get a strong signal wherever you need to be. Avoid interference by trying the 5 GHz network rather than the 2.4 GHz network. That's always said, but also go onto your laptop and find the relevant settings to check that your laptop is actually connecting to the 5 GHz network as well, because if the 2.4 GHz network is the stronger one, then that's going to be the one it probably chooses, and you might have enabled it on your router, but you're not actually connecting to it. Check how many others are using the connection. If you've got a good fiber connection, don't really worry about anything other than downloading, because a good connection like this can easily handle multiple devices connected to it. If you're on a slower ADSL connection or something similar to that, and certain cable connections, a few Netflix users really could impact your ability to hold a good quality video chat. If you want to get into router settings, you can usually prioritize traffic for a certain service or to a particular location, i.e. a particular IP address of your work laptop or whatever it might be. So it's usually called something like quality of service or QoS or traffic prioritization, funnily enough. If you're working from home, try adding your work device to that priority list, so if bandwidth kind of gets clogged up, your device will always take first priority. That's the general idea. Finally, I hate to say this, but a cable is still the best way to get a reliable connection. If you can, fit a LAN cable from your router, and it's inconvenient and it's messy, but quality video calling is all about consistent round trip times, smooth streaming of data really. So a cable is always going to be much, much better at this than any kind of Wi-Fi connection. Second tip, look at the camera. Earlier today, I was on a global all-hands call presented by senior staff. Staff at this level have training on giving presentations. They know what to do with their hands and stuff. They always seem to end up putting their hands like this because it stops you waving your hands around like I'm doing here. Not one of them looked at the camera on the call once. There was not one moment of engagement with the audience. It's the classic case of always wanting to look at the screen because that's where the other person is. And that behavior makes sense, doesn't it? I mean, it's human nature. Try and get used to glancing, at least occasionally. Try and get used to looking at the camera. Don't do it all the time because that's just going to make you look a little bit weird if you're permanently staring into the lens of the camera. It does take practice and it feels a bit odd at first, but it makes a huge difference and is something that you still so rarely see on video calls. I can't do a video on video calling without talking about lighting, can I? As a broad rule, make sure that you have no primary light sources behind you. I saw a major politician on television today doing a video call, window behind him, face dark, it just looked terrible. It's a simple rule. Avoid primary light sources right behind you. Most of the light needs to be falling on your face. However, it's not quite as straightforward as that because of the way webcams kind of monitor and make decisions on their exposure levels. If the background's too dark, the camera will see a significant amount of dark in the shot and it will increase the exposure accordingly, which means your face, which is now lit, is just going to be overexposed. Therefore, it's actually quite good to have a lamp like this. I've got in the background here. It's good to have a light like that in the background because it just sort of balances things up a bit. Just make sure that the light that's falling on your face is a little bit brighter. So it's a bit of trial and error here, but if you take anything away from this at all, it's firstly to light your face and secondly, never put a bright window behind you. Yeah. Most of the time your camera's going to sort out the rest of the stuff. If you want quality video, you need enough light as well as having light at all. As soon as a webcam has enough light, it can push up the frame rate and it can lower the noise reduction. And you can get some really amazing video quality out of webcams these days. The camera is going to produce a much better image with it and far more accurate color, more detail, everything, all the good stuff that we want here. Not everyone has video lights to hand, so just use window light where appropriate and kind of any sort of large diffused light source is going to work for you. I could go on forever about tweaking audio for great sound on video calls. I'm kind of a little bit obsessed with it, to be honest. But some simple guidelines that are going to work for everyone. Number one, if you have more than 2 participants on the call, use a headset. If you don't use one, you can guarantee that someone will be having problems because of echo cancellation not doing its job quite right. Most headsets sound okay and they're pretty cheap, so use a headset. If you can't use a headset, at least use headphones and choose a room that is acoustically fairly well dampened. As soon as you are more than, say, 15 centimeters away from a mic, maybe 30 centimeters away from a microphone, the room sound, the actual sort of ambient sound of the room will start to become really apparent. If your room has any kind of serious reverb, a kitchen's a classically bad example of this. And if it has a load of reverb and a syllable of a word hasn't decayed fully before the next one comes in, speech naturally starts to become a little bit mumbled and unintelligible. And you'd be surprised how annoying this can be for others, even if it's only sort of subconsciously. Number 3, if possible, manually set your audio levels. Figure out where they work best and just try to do this through kind of test calls or maybe speaking to other colleagues or friends or something. Unfortunately, software like Microsoft Teams doesn't let you do this, but you better believe that it will try and do it for you and it will make a mess of it. When you don't speak, a lot of conference software just ramps up the audio level and you end up with a massive kind of noise, mic self-noise and clatters from the background, which might be just a little bit of an air conditioning unit or a washing machine or something. In Windows 10, you can force all the software to have no control over an audio device. It does seem to work some of the time, but I still find that Microsoft Teams makes adjustments to this. So I'm not sure if it's getting changed by some administration rights or something like that, or whether it's just a kind of setting that only works on some programs. I'm not absolutely certain, but that setting is available for you. Directly related to that is always use mute. It's worth mentioning separately, I think, because if you're not speaking, the simple rule is if you're not speaking, go on mute. If everyone on the call is using headsets, you don't maybe need to do this, but it's definitely good practice and something worth getting used to doing. Try and make it automatic behavior whenever you're on a call. Not only will it make the experience better for others, but it could also potentially save you some embarrassment. Heavy breathing. Experiment with your headset or mic position so you're confident that others on the call cannot hear air from your nose and mouth when you're breathing. It's a rookie mistake and is one that will be jumped on by people on the call because it's so irritating. If you stick to the rule around muting, it's again less of a problem, but again, better to be sure. Composition, right? Laptops have the camera at the top of the screen. There's probably a good reason for that. It sort of puts it nice and high, makes you look better in the image, but it's never high enough. If you're going to present to a bit bigger audience, because this sort of stuff doesn't really matter on regular calls, does it? I mean, who cares if you don't look absolutely perfect? But if you're going to be presenting to a bigger audience, I don't know, let's say you're going on BBC News or something, or you're just doing a presentation, you're doing a job interview or something like that. Consider raising the camera up. Just use a few books or boxes and place the camera just above your eye line and then angle the screen downwards. If you look at the kind of angle I have my camera at the moment, it's sat on a tripod and the tripod sits about eye level. The camera is raised a little bit higher and the camera's just angled slightly downwards. I think this kind of angle is much more flattering than often the angle you see on webcams where it's almost looking up someone's nose. And the other thing is people always place their head in the wrong part of the shot. They'll kind of place their head down here somewhere, which means it's kind of looking up the nose and it looks like they're peering into the window of the frame. It just isn't very flattering. And you can sort that out easily by kind of just making sure that the top of the frame maybe just cuts off your hair like that, you know, or just about doesn't cut off your hair, something like that. So your face is in the upper third of the screen. So splitting the screen into a third, you've got this, this, and this. My head is in the upper third of the screen. That will make you look a little bit better, I imagine. It's much easier to do if you've got a separate webcam, but you don't see those around too often because the devices are on board. iPhones and laptops are just so good now. Consider what's behind you in your shot and move things around to make the most of your surroundings. There are so many times when I've recorded a piece to camera and I've wished that I'd moved something out of shot. Just tiny objects that live in your room and seem insignificant to you because you're so used to them, but they can be really distracting on the shot. Depending on where you work, it may not be practical to have a spotless background, but you can at least think about it and adjust the position of your camera to minimize the visible mess, or, as I say, just tidy up a bit. No one wants to see your prized collection of miniature cars in the background or your wonderful library of books. Just keep the background clean, pretty minimal and straightforward if you can. Again, I stress this is most important if you're presenting to a group or doing a job interview or something like that, rather than on a call with friends. And I think this is the last one, if you're still with me. Ditch the backgrounds. It's more my opinion than anything else. During the explosion of video calling during the whole COVID-19 thing, most users at some point have discovered that backgrounds exist, whether it be just simple blurring or instantly placing you into a different location. What the software is actually doing is kind of smart, picking out everything that believes to be a person and keying the rest of the image out on the fly is quite good. The problem is the technology just isn't good enough yet. Backgrounds are a bit of fun and might even be essential occasionally, I suppose, for privacy reasons. But my tip would be to choose your location more wisely and avoid them altogether, or at least use them sparingly. Referring back to the all hands call that I was on earlier today, 2 participants out of the presenters chose to use backgrounds. One guy opted for the blur option, and that blur option repeatedly cut kind of half his face off because he kept turning to the side like this and it was slicing half his face off. Funny thing was, no one actually said anything to him. The second lady dropped herself in a neat minimal office, but it had a terrible key around her hair, and she had this massive big halo around her head. I assume that wasn't intentional, but it looked terrible. So yeah, my advice is avoid them altogether. So there we go. These are my suggestions for getting the most out of your video calls. Admittedly, most of these are improving how well you present yourself to others. So you're not going to reap the benefits from this. But if you consider the bigger picture, as it were, you're the winner if you ultimately get that job that you're interviewing for because you came across really clearly and professionally in the call. People don't tend to complain about the things I've discussed on the video today. I mean, I guess everyone's just too polite, or maybe they're just not too bothered, I suppose. But you can bet that they do notice when someone has a video call that's really good quality. It really does make quite an impression. And I hope this helps anyway. And if you've got any other good recommendations, please do leave them in the comments. Thanks very much for watching, and I will see you soon. Oh, right. Come on, let's go outside. Let's go into the kitchen and get a snack.